Layers in AutoCAD are defined as transparent overlays. Imagine you are holding 10 transparent sheets of papers, each with 0 thickness. And in each sheet, if you have drawn something, when you hold this bunch of sheets together, it will appear as if it is drawn in a single sheet. This is the idea of layers. In AutoCAD, layers are used to lessen the complexity of a drawing by systematically organizing various objects in various layers. In this drawing, I have used a number of layers, and the complete information of the layer can be obtained from the layer panel or from the layer palette, which you get when you click over here. I'll click on this particular pop-up list. If you want, you can turn off the display of a layer. Now whatever is drawn in that layer will not be visible. Now if you want, you can turn off the display of this furniture layer. I have turned off that as well. And if you want, the text layer can also be turned off. And now if you want to work on the walls, it will be very convenient for you because you are seeing only the walls and objects like doors and windows. Whenever you want, you can bring all those frozen layers back to the display. So this is how you systematically organize objects. Let's explore layer properties. Just click on the layer properties button to get this palette. Since it's a palette, it can be resized, it can be docked, it can be hidden, and it can be closed. You can do all activities that you normally do with a palette. You can access the same palette using the layer command. For that, just type the letter LA using the keyboard. You're already familiar with the concept and application of layers. Now let's see how to create these layers. But when you enter this dialog box, you will see 0 layer as the default layer here, because this is the layer which is given to you by the software. Now let's create a new layer. So I'll click on the new layer button over here. Now it will ask you for a layer name. If you do not give any layer name, AutoCAD names the layer as layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, etc. So I'll call this layer as lines because I would like to create a number of lines in this. Now I'll click on create new layer again, and I'll call the next layer as circles. And I'll keep a number of circles in this. Again, new layer, I'll call it as arcs. I'll make a number of arcs in this. One more new layer, and I'll call it as rectangle. Now, if you want to rename a layer, after you create it, you can just select the layer and press the F2 function key. Now, I want to add the letter E. Okay, this is how you rename a layer. A layer can also be renamed by selecting the layer and then you right click it. Then over here, you have a rename layer option. You can also delete a layer and you can create a new layer, and you can set a particular layer as a current layer. All these things can be done by right clicking the mouse. Even if you can create any number of layers in AutoCAD, at a time you will be able to keep only one layer as the current layer. And current layer is a layer in which you actually create drawings. How will you activate a layer as a current layer? It's very easy. Just double click on the layer to be made current. So you will see a tick mark appearing here and the current layer name is displayed here. Okay, I'll close it. You can also use the layer panel. You also have a pop-up over here in the layer panel. When you click on the particular layer name, that layer can be made current. So this is an easier way to make a layer as a current layer. Now I'll construct a number of lines in this. I'll draw a line from here to here and give enters and make a number of lines. Next, I'll create a number of circles in the circle layer. So I'll keep the circle layer as the active layer. Then I'll draw a circle using the center radius method. Okay, I'll make 3 circles. Then I'll again make arc layer as the current layer using this pop-up. Then I'll go to arc option. I'll take 3-point option and I'll make some random arcs. Okay, then I'll make the rectangle layer as the current layer. Then I'll go to rectangle and I'll pick 2 opposite corner points to define a rectangle. Then one more using the same method. Even if I have a number of objects which are kept in different layers, still I can see all these objects at a time because the layers are transparent. Now you know how to create a layer, rename it, make a layer as the current layer and work in it. We can also assign properties to layers. Once you assign a certain property, all the existing as well as the subsequently drawn objects will accept that property. Let's see how to do that. So I'll just click on layer properties. Now here you can see the color, line type, line weight, and the transparency as properties. So I would like to change the color of the lines layer. So click on lines layer and click on the color swatch, and you will see the same color selected dialog box which you have seen while changing the properties. Now I'll select this particular color and give OK. And all the subsequently drawn objects will appear with the same property. Now I'll change the line type. Now click on line type. Then here you have a load button, and I'll load a particular line type, or you can load one or more line types. I'll load hidden, and I'll hold on the control key, and I'll load the tracks line type, and also load center line types. These 3 line types I've loaded, and just give OK, and I'll click on the center and give OK. Now the lines layer will accept that particular property. Now I'll change the line types of other layers as well. So I click on the rectangle layer, and I'll choose hidden. I'll take circle layer, and I'll choose tracks. Then for the arcs layer, I'll load a new line type. So click on continuous and again load. I'll choose zigzag line type, and I'll give OK. One more OK to come back to the layer properties manager. Next we can assign the line weights. So I'll click on the circle layer. I'll assign a particular weight. Let it be say 0.5. Okay, so we have assigned all the 3 properties which are commonly used: color, line type, and line weight. And transparency can also be given. We have already discussed this property while we have discussed about the properties panel, and this property is rarely used. And let us see the change on the screen. Now you can hardly make out the line types because of the LT scale. So we have to change LT scale. I'll give the command LTS for that, and presently the line type scale factor is 1. I'll bring it to 5. Okay, I'll give LT scale once more. I'll make it 7 to see it more clearly. Next we will see the procedure to control the display of layers. It can be done either by using the layer properties manager palette or by using this pop-up which you see in the layer panel. So I'll do that using this panel. If you want to hide the objects in a particular layer, we have 2 options. We can either turn off that layer by clicking on this particular bulb icon, or else you can freeze a layer by clicking against this sun icon. So I'm going to first turn off a layer. Once you turn off a layer, whatever is drawn in that layer will not be visible. And I'll click on circles to turn it off, and I'll click on lines to turn it off, turn off the rectangle as well. But what is the speciality of rectangle layer? You can see that it is a current layer. What will happen if I turn off the current layer? You will get a warning. The software will tell you that you're trying to turn off the current layer. Do you really want to turn it off? I just want to turn it off. Now all the layers are off, including the current layer. Now I'm going to make another rectangle on the rectangle layer. So click on rectangle. I'll pick the first and the opposite corner points. You can't see it because it is drawn in a layer which is turned off. So if you turn off a layer, the object in that layer will not be displayed, but you can work in that layer. Now I'm going to turn on all those layers. Once you turn on a layer, the objects in that layer will reappear on the screen. It is done by clicking on this bulb icon. Now you can see that the bulbs are in the bright state. Now let's do the same using the freeze option. I'll freeze the arc layer, I'll freeze the circle layer as well as the lines layer. But what will happen if I try to freeze the rectangle layer? So you will get a message that this layer cannot be frozen because it's a current layer. That is one of the difference between freeze and off. You can turn off the current layer, but the current layer cannot be frozen. When you freeze a layer in AutoCAD, the objects in that layer will not undergo any regenerations, or it will not take part in any drawing or editing operation, and it will not appear in the print. Let's see that. See, presently all the layers except the current layer is frozen. Now I'm going to execute the erase command. When I'm asked to select the objects, I'll type all. Now all objects got selected. But what happens? Here the prompt is that only 3 found. That means objects on the frozen layer are completely ignored by the software. Okay, even when you go for a print, only these 3 objects will appear in the print. Now let's call back all those frozen layers. I'm going to turn off all the layers except the current layer. Now I'll again going to execute the same erase command. When I'm asked to select the objects, I'll give all. Now 12 found. You have got a message that 12 objects are identified. That means all the objects in the layer which is turned off will be identified by the software. So when you turn off a layer, the objects in that layer will not be displayed. That's all. But those objects will take part in all the editing operations, including printing. So that is a basic difference between freeze and off. Now I'm going to turn on all those layers which are turned off by clicking on the bulb icon. Next I'll teach you the lock and unlock options in layer properties. So when I lock a particular layer, for example, I'm just going to click on the lock icon at the circles layer. Now the circle layer got locked. When you take the cursor onto the circle, you will see a symbol of lock appearing on the screen. When I try to erase this circle or objects in a locked layer, you will get a message that one was on a locked layer. That means if you lock a layer, you won't be able to edit the objects in a locked layer. But you can make use of those objects for certain operations which will not affect the object or which will not modify the objects. For example, I'll draw a line in the lines layer. Okay. Now I would like to just trim off this particular portion of the line. So I'll go to trim command. When I'm asked to select the cutting edges, I'll choose this particular circle as a cutting edge which is kept in a lock layer. But when I select it, AutoCAD will permit me to select it. Now when I click on this particular line, it will get trimmed off. That means you can use those objects for certain operations which will not modify those objects. And I'm going to unlock the layers. So this is how you lock and unlock layers. Next I'll go to Properties Manager. And using Properties Manager interface, you can perform the same activity of locking and unlocking layers. Okay, let me just resize it. Now I have a print status enable and disable icon. So when I disable the print status of a particular layer, those objects will not appear in the print. It is as good as freezing those layers. But when you freeze a layer, those objects will not be visible on the screen. But when you disable the lock status, those objects will be visible on the screen, but it will not appear on the print. Next, I'll teach you the Layer State Manager. To get the Layer State Manager, you should click on this particular icon. Just click on that, or else you can hold down the Alt key and the S key of the keyboard simultaneously. Using Layer State Manager, you can save certain predefined states so that at any point of time, as per your requirement, you can restore those states, and hence you can save a lot of time and effort. When I illustrate it, it will be more clear to you. So I'll click on New to define a new state, and I'll call the state as only lines, because in this state I want only the lines layer to be displayed, and I want the rest of the layers in the frozen state, and I also want the lines layer to be in the locked state. Okay, so I'll call this as only lines. This is just to identify the state, and you can write something like only the lines displayed and rest of the layers in the frozen. Okay, I'm not going to write it here, and just give OK. So you have defined a state. Now you can edit this state. So I'll select it and edit. I want only the lines to be displayed, and it should be in the locked state. So I have locked the lines layer, and I have frozen rest of the layers. So that is how that state is defined. Next, I want to restore the state. So click on Restore button. When you restore it, only the lines layer is displayed and it is in the locked state, and the rest of the layers are in the frozen state. You can also define a state in which all the layers are in the on state, or all the layers are visible. So what I'll do is, again I'll go to Layer State Manager, I'll define a new state, and I'll call it as all visible. And you can edit that state. I'll click on Edit, unfreeze all the layers, then I'll unlock the lines layer, and I just give OK. Now all visible I want to restore, so click on Restore. So everything is back. Now let's see the procedure to delete a layer. See, if you want to delete a layer in AutoCAD, that layer should be unreferenced, which means that that layer should be an empty layer. Is it possible to delete the circles layer now? No, because we have some objects in the circle layer. So how will you delete the circle layer? For that, you have to first make this layer an empty layer. And how will you do that? You have to transfer the objects drawn in the circle layer by selecting those objects. Then you have to put it in the desired layer. Suppose I want to put these into the lines layer. So click on lines. The moment you click on lines layer, you will see that the object's properties will get changed, which is a clear indication that these circles are taken to the lines layer. Now the circle is an empty layer, right? So what I'll do is, I'll go to Layer Properties Manager, then you click on circles, right click, then you go to delete layer, or else you can just click on this particular icon to delete it, or you can press Alt D. Now you're familiar with two types of properties that can be assigned to objects. One is called object properties, assign and change using the properties palette. Now we have seen the layer properties. That means if you create a layer and if you assign properties such as color, line weight and line type, etc., any objects that is drawn in that layer will accept that property. And we call this the layer property. How will you change the layer property to object property? It's very easy. Let's try to change the color of the circle to object color. I want to change the color of the circle from layer color to object color. For that, what you have to do is select the circle, then in the properties palette, or you can use the properties panel, choose a particular color. Presently, the color is set at by layer. By layer means the color of the circle is the color given to the layer. Now if you just change to some other color, it will accept that color. Now the color of the circle is the object color, not the layer color. How will you know that? Just select the circle. Now here the color is displayed as a blue shade, which is assigned to it. Now I want to change it back to the layer color. For that, select the circle, then you go to the color panel, then you click on by layer. By layer means the color which is given to the layer. Similarly, you can change other properties as well. This is the case with existing objects drawn in different layers having different properties. But suppose I want to set a global property, which means that all the subsequently drawn objects will accept that property, and the properties won't go according to layers. I'll just illustrate with a simple example. I want to set the yellow color for all my subsequently drawn objects. Should not go according to the layers. So just set the yellow color as the global object color. Now I would like to draw a line in the lines layer. You know that lines layer is assigned this particular color. Now line will appear only in the yellow color. I want to set arc layer as the current layer. You can see that this layer is assigned white color, and I'll draw another arc in the arc layer, but even this arc will appear only with the yellow color, since this being a global property. But the line type will go according to the line type which is assigned to this layer, because line type is set at by layer. So by layer means the property which is given to layer. But once you override by layer with any other property using the properties panel, that particular property will take precedence or priority. So that's all about the idea of layers in AutoCAD. In the next video, I'll cover some of the most frequently used shortcuts in the layer panel, and we will do a small project related with the layers.